Ο Άντι Μανάτος είναι ίσως ο πιο γνωστός ελληνοαμερικανός λομπίστας των εθνικών θεμάτων στην Ουάσιγκτον. Προσωπικός φίλος του Προέδρου Τζο Μπάιντεν και άλλων προέδρων και μέλων του Κογκρέσου, θεωρείται ως ένας από τους ανθρώπους με μεγάλη πολιτική επιρροή στην Αμερικανική πρωτεύουσα. Έχει διατελέσει υφυπουργός εμπορίου στην Αμερικανική κυβέρνηση και έχει εργαστεί στο Λευκό Οίκο και τη Γερουσία. Σε ηλικία 19 ετών, ο Άντι Μανάτος εργάστηκε για τον πρόεδρο Λίντον Τζόνσον, ακολουθώντας τα βήματα του πατέρα του, που ήταν σύμβουλος του Προέδρου Τζον Κέννεντι, ενώ τώρα την εταιρεία έχει αναλάβει ο Μάικ, ο μεγαλύτερος γιος της οικογένειας. Βρέθηκε στην Αθήνα για την παρουσίαση του βιβλίου του «Οι εξαιρετικοί Έλληνες», όπου αναδεικνύει επιτυχημένες διαδρομές Ελλήνων που διαμόρφωσαν την ιστορία του ελληνισμού στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες.
Thank you so much for this interview to the Greek public television. You're here in Athens for vacation, but also promoting your book. We have met each other some decades ago in Washington when I was a young correspondent. And what impressed me the most was that feeling of a trust that had on you, American presidents, members of the Congress, other officials. One of them was President Joe Biden. How long do you know each other?
Well, I was 28 years old and he was 30 when we first met, so we've known each other a very long time. And we've been quite close. He has a Greek community in his state that we've been involved with, but we've been involved with him personally. He took a great liking to Hellenes. He admires our culture. He admires the way our people relate with each other. He admires our loyalty. And those are many issues that are very important to him. So he's really resonated well with us over all the years and fought with us on all these issues all these years.
He's one of the presidents that he knows of most of the people in the governments here in Greece and Cyprus, isn't he?
Oh, that's right. No, we've had some great presidents on our issues like Bill Clinton, but in terms of knowledge of our issues and the issues in Greece and Cyprus, the ecumenical patriarchate. As a matter of fact, one time he told me that he said, I've had a chance to meet pretty much every leader in the world. He said, and the two most Christ-like people I've ever met, and he says, I say this as a Catholic, are Nelson Mandela and ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew. So he's really been very, very close to our community.
President Biden was very close, really close to Senator Sarbanes, who was one of his mentors for Greece and Cyprus.
Well, they were very close. Paul Sarbanes was such a rare person. In the history of Princeton University, only one person graduated with the highest undergraduate award, the Pine Award, and had his son also do it, and that was Paul Sarbanes. Everybody respected his opinion, Republicans and Democrats. But Paul Sarbanes and Joe Biden had a particular relationship. And as much as Joe knew about the issues, he knew that his knowledge couldn't compare to Paul's. Paul's was extraordinary. And Paul used to work very closely with a man here in Athens by the name of Kostas Karas, who was also an Oxford graduate like Paul was. And Biden would listen to anything that Paul Sarbanes told him about our issues. As a matter of fact, he knew our issues, but after talking with him about the details, he would always finish by saying, and don't worry, I do whatever Paul Sarbanes tells me to do.
Now, give us your take in regard to the picture of Greece today in the United States. Now, Greece and the United States enjoy excellent relations. Is it because of the Biden administration? Is it because of Turkey? Is it of Greece as an ally?
It is a combination of all of these things. You would be shocked at one thing in Washington today, and that is, ever since Erdogan bought the S-400s, the mentality of American public officials who are very concerned about strategic interests has changed dramatically. The support Turkey had disappeared when he did that. However, like we said, Joe Biden knows Greece and Cyprus and these issues well. And your government over here, I mean, my God, when we got the Prime Minister to come over and speak to a joint session of Congress, the remarks he made were extraordinary. You can't imagine the number of senators and members of Congress who came up to me just to say, how blown away they were by the remarks of the Prime Minister. So you really have a wonderful combination here. You've got a Congress that's much more receptive, far better understanding the importance of having a loyal ally like Greece, and also having a government over here, as we have with such an impressive prime minister.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? What is the prospects for a dialogue between Greece and Turkey right now?
Between Greece and Turkey? Well, it's very difficult, in my estimation, and I say this only because so many times we've been through situations with Turkey where they made commitments to specific things. Commitments so close, for example, they were going to reopen Halki in Turkey for the seminary. We got a call from Secretary Clinton's, she was Secretary of State's office, saying, we want to give you the heads up, they're about to reopen Halki. And it would never happen. But they would toy with American government officials, promising these things, and our people frequently believed them. And since virtually none of them have come true, it doesn't give me great optimism. However, I think because Prime Minister Mitsotakis addressed a joint session of Congress, which Erdogan has never been able to do, and just to tell you what a shock it was to Erdogan, every time we have, this is hard to believe, every time we have a state dinner at the White House for a president or prime minister of Cyprus, the Turks pick that day to overfly Greek islands at a record number as their way of communicating to us, there's nothing that you can do with the American government that's more important than what we can do. However, that address before a joint session of Congress is something Erdogan never could do. And I think he gained a lot of respect, although you remember his words. He said, Mitsotakis, you're dead to me. But I think behind all of that, it was such a shock to him, he gained respect for Mitsotakis and for Greece. I mean, look at the American military footprint in Greece today compared to what it was just recently. So I do think there is, if ever, well, let me say it this way, if ever there's been an opportunity with the Turkish, not only Erdogan, his predecessors would make all these promises as well. If ever there was an opportunity, I think this is probably it.
Back to you and American presidents, your relations with American presidents. You had a very close relation with Bill Clinton, Obama. Who of the American presidents knew better our issues and was very supportive?
Well, nobody has known them anywhere nearly as well as Joe Biden knows them. Bill Clinton was such a phenomenally brilliant person. I mean, of all our presidents, and we've had some wonderful presidents, nobody can hold a candle to Bill Clinton. He's just a mental giant. And if you think about it, what this man did, and most American presidents did just about nothing for our issues. He got the Ammonia 5 released from Albania. One was going to be murdered. He got FYROM to change their constitution to stop threatening northern Greece. He apologized for whatever America may have done during the junta in Athens. He got Germany and France to change so Cyprus could begin EU negotiations, because at that time, people thought Turkey would take the rest of Cyprus, but we knew they wouldn't do it to an EU country. So they got accession to EU to begin. And he is the first president in U.S. history to visit the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So he was so incredibly productive and so responsive. He was such a good friend that he was, and so brilliant, he could understand an issue like that. Once you explain something to him that most presidents would say, well, I'll talk to people about it, we'll do what we can. He could pick up on it right away and go. But Joe's knowledge is just unique on our issues, Joe Biden's.
Now, Senator Menendez is doing a great job at the Congress.
Yeah.
How important is his role at the Senate?
Oh, crucially important as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Plus, he's another brilliant person. It's tremendous value to have somebody as smart as he is in that position. And he has a deep connection to the Greek American community. He's really been involved from the beginning, but since he's become chairman, anything he can do to help our issues, he does. Our bureaucracy has always been our problem, and it still is. But his knowledge on Greek issues, I would say, is probably second only to Paul Sarbanes. I mean, he really is deeply into his understanding of them.
3 generations of Manatos in Washington. First, your father, Mike, you then, and now your son. Tell us your story, when you started as an assistant to President Lyndon Johnson.
Well, as I was very young, and my father was the first Greek American to work in the White House. President Kennedy asked him to go there and help him with the Senate. Dad knew Kennedy and Johnson when Dad worked in the Senate, and they were senators. And then he stayed on with Lyndon Johnson after Kennedy was killed. And at that time, I was asked to be an advance man for one of his presidential campaigns. And so I had an opportunity.
At what age?
I was only 19. I was the youngest advance man. And it was very exciting, of course, at that age to fly around the country and arrange for these visits that he was going to have. And then after that, I went to work in the United States Senate and had an opportunity to be a staff director of the committee when I met Biden. And then following that, President Carter was elected, and he appointed me to be Assistant Secretary of Commerce. And I had an opportunity to get to know the problems and the operations of the executive branch and the bureaucracy. And then after President Reagan came in, I moved in. My father and I put together the company of Manatos and Manatos, and we began those activities. And then when my son graduated from Princeton, my father's name was Mike, and my first son's name is Mike. I tried to get him to take a vacation after college and go to Europe and enjoy 2 weeks. No, he had to be in the office the next day. and Mike's been that way all these decades since that time. So yeah, it's been a family operation.
You and your father have established and maintained the annual meeting of the Greek community with the American presidents. How difficult was to establish such a meeting with the system, with the establishment? Was an easy job?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. Just an example is how difficult it is. There are many operations in Washington where the annual budget is $2-3 million a year, and of course every one of these people would like to meet with every president, and they're unable to do it. And in terms of nationalities, there are only 2 nationalities who have met with every president every year for over 30 years. That's the Irish, who are 1 out of every 10 Americans, and we Greeks, 1 out of every 250 Americans. So it's a very difficult thing to do. A man who also deserves a great deal of credit in helping make this happen is the person who I believe is probably the smartest Greek American today, and that is Father Alex Karloutzis. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Joe Biden, and he has this magical ability. He's a deeply religious person. He's a terrific priest. But he has this magical ability for people to admire and fall in love with him. Every president thinks Father Alex is absolutely perfect. And so Father was key, and he's got a community around the country that's very close to Father Alex. So we worked hand in glove with him. I dare say that he could not have done it without us, but we could not, well, we could have maybe gotten it started. We could have maybe done it for a year or 2, but we could not have maintained it for over 30 years without Father Alex also. So it's a very difficult thing. But we're very lucky because the bureaucracy is such a problem. And to be able to talk directly to the President of the United States and to override or straighten him out, help him understand what the bureaucracy is doing wrong. It's had tremendous policy value. I'll never forget one of our meetings, and I said something to the president. I said, you know, you were doing that so well, and now everybody's very disappointed in you because X happened. I can't remember what it was. And the next day we got a call from the Secretary of State's office saying, what is it that you have the president so upset about? He called the Secretary of State and jumped all over her at that time. So it's of tremendous value, this annual meeting with the president.
Explain us, what is the Greek lobby in the United States in Washington today, and what changed since you and your father started promoting the Greek issues in Washington?
Well, interestingly, there's a little bit of history of our community. I don't know if you find that interesting or not, but unfortunately, and you have to bear in mind, the people who came to Greece in the came from Greece in the early 1900s were peasants. Everyone. It was not Greece's best and brightest. I mean, imagine if the best and brightest had gone to the United States during these times, what they would have been able to rise to. So our people were not well educated, and they used to actually, this sounds silly, but it was true, they used to join organizations and then so they could fight with each other. They would have more arguments among the Greek organizations than anything else. When Cyprus was invaded, it was the very first time. I will never forget, we had a meeting in Senator Eagleton's office, my boss, on a weekend, and I had the leaders of every part of the Greek community there. And one man stomped out of the room and said, I refuse to be in the same room with this man because he supports, I won't say what his position was, but he supports this and I refuse. And we said, look, we have a very simple issue. Either we continue this and Cyprus is going to be taken by the Turks, or we pull together. It's the only way we even have a chance. And here's the magical thing about what Hellenes are able to do that other people, for some reason, are not able to do. In the history of modern America, only one time did anybody get to Congress to override the White House and State Department on a major foreign policy issue. And it was these relatively uneducated, just rising Hellenes. Our people in 1974 were just becoming doctors or lawyers or important people in different positions. But the community came together and just did magic. And after that time, we became seen in Washington. People could see what our community was able to do, and we gathered a respect from people. And you know, the respect moves around it. And one technique that we used was some people on the Important Appropriations Committee were up for election, and only one of them had been very much against us. So we put all the money we could into defeating this person. The only person on the Appropriation Committee to lose was this man. So we quickly let the word be known on Capitol Hill that he's the only one who's against us and he's the only one who lost. And the word passed like wildfire, and we suddenly developed a real presence.
Mm-hmm. What was the most difficult time for you in Washington during all these years?
Well, that's a very good question, and we have had some extremely difficult times. We've had times probably when Andreas Papandreou was prime minister, because our bureaucracy exaggerated wildly. I will never forget, the Turkish prime minister went to, I've forgotten the country now, a country that's very much enemy of the United States, signed a trade agreement and went home. And silence. Papandreou goes to the very same country, signs a much smaller trade agreement, comes back to Athens. The State Department was on Capitol Hill saying, look what this man has done, he's the enemy of America. And so they were just terribly against us. And then November 17th, again, that was another time, some foolish bureaucrats got in their head the idea that November 17th was somehow Greeks in Athens who were political and were doing this, and somehow it was an assault on America. And there was literally a publication that the biggest terrorist country in the world was Greece. It came out of the Library of Congress, of all things. So sometimes the bureaucracy can be extremely difficult. but it's night and day to what we have at this moment.
Mm-hmm. In the early 70s, the picture for Greeks in the United States was not the best. Greeks did not have the best reputation. Faced racism, sometimes weren't allowed to buy houses in certain areas in Washington. What changed this picture for Greeks?
Well, you're right about that. Most people don't realize that there were times when there were what we called restrictive covenants on the deed of the house. It says this is your house, but you cannot sell it to the following people. And Greeks were listed in some of those neighborhoods. What happened was that we emerged. I'll tell you, I was working in the Senate, and we had a recess, and I had some time, and we were in charge of the Census Bureau. So I noticed that Greeks were rising, and so I did a study, and I looked at the Greeks and how they compared to other nationalities. The Greeks who came to America in the early 1900s, first generation, were at the very bottom in education and income compared to the other nationalities. In one generation, we rose from the bottom to be among the very top in education and income. And this was happening, and I'll never forget my father, who knew the community well because they would all go to him at the White House. When I started the study, I said, I think we're going to find our people have done amazingly well. And he said, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed because our community was really, in our church, if you were a successful man, you were not a waiter, you were a maitre d', but that was it. I mean, we did not have these people rising. And what happened is our people became members of Congress, senators, doctors, presidents of universities, and we then began being perceived very differently.
Senator Sarbanes, you have said that you played an extremely good role on this.
Oh, he was such a rare person, respected by so many people of both parties, that yes, he was magical for our issues. As a matter of fact, when I told you we, for the first time, had the Congress override the White House and State Department, I was working in the Senate at the time, and I was putting together to get the votes there. But in the House, we had 2 Greek Americans. And here's another interesting point about Greeks. Of 535 senators and members of Congress, these lowly Greeks, there were 3 Rhodes Scholars. Excuse me. One was the Speaker of the House. The other 2 were Greek Americans, Sarbanes and Bradamus. And Paul was so highly respected, they did a survey in the House that said, who's the brightest of the 435 congressmen? They asked the staff. And Paul was selected. I mean, he was that extraordinary of a person, that bright, that well-respected. He had no enemies in either party. People just looked up to him. And his presence, we won those. We had 12 votes to impose an embargo on Turkey because of their invasion of Cyprus. We won many of those votes by 1 vote. And had Paul Sarbanes not been organizing the House, we never would have won those votes.
Mm-hmm. Greece and Cyprus are small countries, don't have a lot of budget, big budget for lobbying. What makes the difference for Greece and Cyprus?
Well, I'll tell you what makes the difference. And the difference is because of Greeks. We are, and that's, I make the point in this book, we are truly unique people. Somehow, and I don't know how, periodically throughout history, we rise up and do things nobody else can do. And it goes from, you know, how in God's name did they measure the circumference of the earth in Athens within 10% accuracy 2,000 years before the British even started to speak English, or the wheel went to 2 continents. And then we come to, well, then when the Greeks came to America, I guess that was the next move, and went from being at the bottom to the top. And then we come to World War II. The Axis forces destroyed 14 countries. The Brits were in retreat to Dunkirk. And here is little Greece standing alone, and they rose above everybody and was able to do what then Churchill said, were it not for the Greeks, we don't know who would have won World War II. And then when we get to the United States, we're one of the few that can meet with every president. We're one of the very few that is able to accomplish these things. And our people, I think, are the reason, and we're also very proud of it. I found a survey, interesting survey, that said, asked Europeans, how do you think about your culture? How good is your culture? And they had various percentages. And the highest among the non-Greek was like 34% said, yes, we have one of the best. In Greece, it was 84% of the Greeks said we have the best culture. And what happens in Washington? You know, we do millions of dollars of work for free, as do some other Hellenes. Why? Because we love what we have. This Hellenism it helped all of our lives so much that I think our Philotimos makes us feel obligated to repay in any way that we can. I really think that is the answer why we're so few people, but we do so well in Washington. I think it's because we're Hellenes and there's something magical there.
Tell us about your book. It highlights successes of Greeks. What is the most fascinating story that you like?
Well, there are so many in there. One, I think, has to do with Philotimos. And by the way, if I don't know how many people in Greece have seen this, but we did a video called The Greek Secret about Philotimos. We had 1 million people view it after just a month. But in there's a story that I think tells what is so unusual about Hellenes. And it's one of the reasons in the United States, why do Greeks spend so much time with other Greeks? Because in our culture, if somebody does something very good for you, you feel obligated. You feel you have to repay this person. I can do something for my non-Greek friends in Washington, they'll say thank you, and that's it. There was a man, an old Greek, who went to Denver, Colorado, and he was a peasant. He started a little hamburger place, and he made some money. But his family was here. It was during Greece during World War II, during the Civil War, and they were suffering over here, and he would send money to them always. And one of the sons of that sister grew up, and he became actually the #2 in the European Union delegation who went to Washington, representing the EU. And he gets to Washington, and what does he do? He flies all the way to Denver, Colorado, just to visit the grave of this uncle who had done this for him as a child. That's unique. Other people don't do those things. And our people do magical things, but I do think it's the Philotimos that's the most unique, and it makes us most valuable. I found when my sons went to Princeton and Cornell that you can go to major cities in America and you can go to the Princeton Club, and there you're going to meet bright people who are successful and you have something in common. Well, every Greek has a Princeton Club. You go to any city in America as a Greek American, you go to the church, you suddenly have people, they're bright, they're successful, they're welcoming you, that you have so much in common with them. I think that's the unique element.
Tell us finally about your origin from Crete.
Well, our family is from the Hania area, Apokorina, a little village called Heliomudou. And my grandfather wanted to go to school, so he lived with his godfather. Again, Philotimos, he lived with his godfather during school in Hania so that he could go to school. And he left Greece when he was 19. And it was very tough for the Greeks when he went over there in 1910. He laid track across Nebraska, railroad track. Those jobs ended. He went to work in the coal mines. Those were the only jobs open. And the coal mines were so dangerous, I lost a great uncle on my father's side, and a great uncle on my mother's side died in the mines. My grandfather nearly died in the mines. And in this little town out in Wyoming, there were 200 Greek families. And I did the analysis there. 1/3 of the males were dead within 20 years. It was that dangerous. Yet, and here's again our philotimo, growing up among those people, you think they'd be miserable. Oh my God, our lives are horrible. How could this be so bad? They were thrilled. Why? Because their children could go to school, maybe even go to college. They couldn't even imagine that. And that is our story. Then Dad, when he graduated from college at 16 at a very young age, he was offered a job back in Washington just to be a typist. And then he moved up within the office, and then, as I said, President Kennedy and Johnson took him downtown. So that's our family story.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
It was a pleasure.
It was more of a pleasure for me, I think. I enjoyed it the most of all.